Right now, the fight to keep Kilmar Abrego Garcia in the U.S. is entering a new phase. After he turned himself into ICE agents this morning in Baltimore, his attorney thanked the supporters who have stood by him and his family.
This is a person who didn't even know that he had anyone looking out for him, much less the entire nation, for the 3 months that he was detained in El Salvador. This is a person who, feared that the world had forgotten about him.
Thank you for being with us tonight. I'm Simone D'Alba. A federal judge has ordered the government not to move Abrego Garcia from the Virginia detention facility where he's being held. Judge PAULA XINIS also raised serious concerns about whether the Trump administration is using the threat of deportation to Uganda to force him to give up his constitutional rights. Our digital investigative reporter, Jordan Fisher, listened in on today's hearing. He's joining me now. Jordan, what exactly did Judge PAULA XINIS decide today about Abrego Garcia's detention?
Right, so the most immediate takeaway from today's hearing is that he's going to stay in the undisclosed Virginia detention facility where he's being held right now for an indefinite period of time while this initial habeas petition works out. Now that's his efforts not to be deported to Uganda, but the real decision there is going to be made by an immigration judge in immigration court. What happened today is in federal court in Maryland.
Interesting. Okay, why is the judge concerned about the government's push to deport him specifically to Uganda?
Right, so as we reported throughout the day and throughout the weekend, there was this plea deal that was turned down by Abrego Garcia that would have seen him plead guilty in that Tennessee criminal case we've done so much reporting about, and then ultimately be deported to Costa Rica, where he would get legal immigrant status, where he would be assured that he would not be politically persecuted, and most importantly, that he would not be deported back to his native El Salvador. Now, what Judge XINIS said today is Uganda hasn't offered any of those assurances that she's seen, or at least that the government has provided. She's worried that he could be detained there if he's deported there, or that he could be removed back to El Salvador. It's a process known as refoulement.
Okay, I wanted to go back to that because I found that to be very interesting. I'm going to restate that. So the judge noted that nothing indicates if he gets sent to Uganda, he could essentially then be ping-ponged over back to El Salvador, in which case we're kind of back to square one with that. Did that shock you to hear that at all?
Well, that's the big concern that his attorneys have raised, this refoulement issue. It's a really technical term, you don't hear it a lot, but that's the real concern here, because there's this 2019 order from an immigration judge barring his return to El Salvador over threats of gang violence. And if they try to do an end run around the process, which is Judge XINIS worried about today, by sending him first to Uganda or even to Spain, as his attorney said, then they violated that order ultimately.
Let's talk about, we heard the judge use the phrase constitutional rights. In this context, what did she mean by that?
Right, well, that's this whole process, this appeal process, even in immigration court, which for people who aren't familiar with immigration court, the judges are employees of DOJ. They're not traditional judges the way we think of them, but there is a process to appeal to the appellate federal courts, which are judges that are nominated by the president, approved by the Senate, or confirmed by the Senate. And then also this habeas process here that he's been going through of challenging his detention, and one thing to note, as his attorney said today, is if the government wanted, they could remove him to Costa Rica tomorrow, because he has not raised any credible fear issue there.
I wanted to ask you, you and I were just talking in the break a little bit about this case, and the judge had said very clearly, your clients are absolutely forbidden at this juncture to remove Abrego Garcia from the continental United States. And you had touched on this. The Department of Justice essentially said they understand, they would comply, but there's still wiggle room with that in terms of, did you say the immigration lawyer aspect of this? Do I understand that correct?
Yeah, right now Judge XINIS's order bars them from moving Abrego Garcia from an undisclosed facility in Virginia where he's being held. This is an ICE immigration facility. They have several in the Northern Virginia area. It's not clear exactly where he is. She imposed that order to ensure he has access to his attorneys, and in a not very subtle way to ensure that the government doesn't violate his rights this time around like they did in March when they violated that judge's order and unlawfully deported him back to El Salvador.
We've been talking about, just the nature, how big this case has become. We heard President Donald Trump talking about Abrego Garcia specifically today, citing some domestic violence records that the president had brought up. I wanted to know, just before we have to let you go, was there anything else about the judge today or anything about the proceedings in court that stood out to you or that you want us to understand about the case?
Right, there's this dichotomy between what we hear on what we see on social media, what we hear from the administration, which is that he is an MS-13 member, that he's a domestic abuser, that he's a violent criminal, and what the judges who have actually looked at the evidence here have said. That the judge who upheld his release in Tennessee said it would be farcical farcical for him to find that Abrego Garcia is a member of MS-13 based on the evidence in front of him. You know, what we heard from Judge XINIS today is a bit more subdued than she's been in previous hearings, but she accused, you know, the Justice Department of the process of being like trying to nail down Jell-O to get any information from them about what would happen if he was in ICE detention. They actually initially said ICE wouldn't even consider what country to send him to until he was in their custody. That apparently turned out not to be accurate because they've, you know, they have this plea negotiations going on.
Also, you know, something we've talked about a little bit was all of these charges, all of these additional things that came down the pipeline were not present at the time of his initial arrest and deportation, which is something we've kind of detailed and looked into. Jordan Fisher for us today. That was, you know, a lot of legal proceedings.
Sure.
I know you'll stay on top of it for us. We'll have more for you tonight at 5:30.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.